Now, earlier in the Gospel of John, in this chapter, we find out that Jesus was in Jerusalem attending the Festival of Tabernacles, or the Festival of Booths. They had a ceremony on the seventh day. The priest takes freshly drawn water, probably from the pool of Siloam, and walks up the hill to the temple from the pool of Siloam with a pitcher full of water, and then he pours it out on the ground as he circles around the altar. It is seen as an offering to God, and it is a symbol of thanksgiving to God for the gift of water that helps the land produce food for everyone. Now, we may remember some of our Sunday school lessons about the Feast of Booths. That may have been long ago for some of us. It was a harvest festival, as you may recall. The people made temporary shelters on the roofs of their homes in the cities, or in the gardens if they had a large enough yard to have a garden, or out in the countryside, they make that booth down on the ground, perhaps in their gardens or other places. Or even, if they had no other place to build it, they would build it on the temple grounds in one of the courtyards of the temple. Now, they were very temporary shelters. They weren't even substantial enough to call them shacks. They were just booths made of branches and leaves from palm trees. And they were thatched very loosely, so loosely that you could look up through them at night and see the stars. It reminded the people of the days that they were wandering in the desert with Moses. And it reminded them that in those past times, long ago, they lived without a roof to protect them from the sun or the cold nights. Now, at the same time, the Festival of the Booths, and this is the part you might remember from Sunday school, the festival celebrated the ingathering of barley and wheat and grapes. It was a harvest festival. And they expressed their joy with songs and with psalms of thanksgiving to God for the abundance of the earth. And people sometimes called it the season of their gladness. Now, William Barclay suggests that at the very moment on this seventh day, when Jesus was in the temple and he observed the priest pouring the water out around the altar, he stood up and shouted, "If you are thirsty, come to me and drink." What a dramatic counterpoint to the action of the priest. As the people were remembering their need for water in the desert and how Moses struck a rock and God made water flow out of that rock as he struck it, Jesus tells them that they will find living water in their relationship with him. You know, Jesus always thought of the people that were around him. He knew their needs. He understood their fears and their hopes. Jesus knew the quirks in their lives and what they really needed. He recognized the deepest emotions that they felt. He knew that those emotions came either from an incredible joy because of a relationship that they may have, or several relationships, or from a profound emptiness because they realized that they lacked something vital. And Jesus invites them for them to come and fill their emptiness with God's presence, God's grace, God's love. Now, John makes an editorial comment after he quotes Jesus shouting out these things. that Jesus referred to the Holy Spirit as a source of this water deep within those who really believe in him. So what might we say about this short passage? It seems that when we believe in Jesus as the special one from God, when we come to Christ, the Spirit of God will bring renewed life to each believer. And then John adds a cryptic note that we sometimes don't understand, that the Spirit had not yet come because Jesus had not been crucified and glorified, although he doesn't use those exact words. He hadn't been given his full glory. So right away, we might jump to think about Pentecost. Of course, John wrote this many, many years after the Pentecost event. So John, perhaps, was prefiguring the Pentecost event that happened to the church. At Pentecost, the gathered Christians felt the power of God moving among them and changing them. They changed from frightened individuals who clung together. They were afraid of the future. They had no idea about what they were supposed to do. They simply came together to go over the events over and over again that led to their following Jesus, and then the sudden loss of Jesus' presence from them that night of his arrest and the next day of his crucifixion. They did not understand the meaning of Jesus' death and resurrection very well. They weren't even too sure about the truth of his resurrection and his ascension. You see, they could not get off square one. But now, on the day of Pentecost, the Holy Spirit came on them. They no longer felt frightened. They truly felt the strength of the living water that was given to them. They did not fear the authorities anymore. They spoke boldly, at least Peter spoke boldly, to the crowd outside the house where they had gathered. They shared the story of Jesus and Jesus' teachings. They invited the listeners to make a commitment to Jesus Christ. And they began to see the future and how to get there. The words of Jesus began to make sense to them because God had given to them this power that they didn't have before. They now understood that life really is stronger than death. And now, on that day of Pentecost, that Jesus meant more to them than he ever did before. And all that because of the power and the presence of the Holy Spirit. Well, today is the celebration of Pentecost. And that's why last week I asked for you, if you wanted to wear red. And so quite a few of you have worn red very boldly, very nicely. Why we have the red cloths on the communion table and on the pulpits. It's the anniversary of the birth of the church in Jerusalem, almost 2,000 years ago. We as Christians, we as a congregation, ought to make this the most important celebration of the year. Oh, we make Christmas the most important, and we make Easter the second most important. But perhaps Pentecost should be the one of prime importance to us. It marks the beginning of the community that follows Jesus. We remember the power that came to the disciples that day. It changed them into effective communicators. They became a community that mattered in the wider community. They began to change the world around them on that day. My friends, today we are their successors. I sometimes wonder, however, if it really makes any difference. Does it matter to you that the Spirit of God comes upon the members of this community? Does it matter that we have access to the presence of the living God because of this Spirit? Do we care that Jesus entrusts us with His power and with His life-giving love? Do we look for evidence of God's Spirit when we come together to worship and to pray and to share? I sure hope that we care, because if we don't, then church is about as useful as a swimming pool without water, or a basketball court without a ball, without backboards. Thomas Long tells a story about Lillian Daniel, a United Church of Christ pastor, who was arrested while protesting in the United States Capitol building in Washington, D.C., with other Christians who were there protesting some unfair labor practices. I don't know the details of that part. That's not part of the story. Well, they had sung hymns before they were arrested. And then Reverend Daniel was locked up in the paddy wagon all alone. One of the policemen who was assigned to guard her, like she needed a lot of guarding, locked up. But that policeman came up to her and apologized to her. He said to her, I'm very sorry for the way you were treated and for this undignified thing that has happened to you. And so she asked that policeman if he was sorry about it. Why was he a policeman at the Capitol? If he disliked it so much, why was he there? And he related that it was natural for him to become a policeman there because he had served in the military, and this seemed like the logical thing for him to do. Anyway, he said, he would retire soon and soon would not be assigned these kinds of duties that were distasteful to him. And then he added something. He said he really appreciated the singing of Amazing Grace that that group of Christians had sung in the Capitol building. The voices sounded especially meaningful to him, he related. And somehow he revealed a thirst for something spiritual as he told this story to her. And Lillian thanked him. And then he informed her that soon she would be getting out. And she replied to him that he would be getting out soon too. Sometimes people have a thirst they cannot quench because they go to wells that are dry. But on this Pentecost day, we must remember that Jesus is not simply a man who lived far back in history. For us, Jesus is a living presence and a giver of life that is abundant and rich. An incredible mystery becomes real to us. That when we know the Spirit is in the other person, that person becomes to us Jesus Christ Himself. And we see Jesus in the flesh today, in our own day, right among us. For He lives in the lives of true Christians